Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video we will be looking at the first inquiry question of the superpowers topic. Please like and subscribe if this helps your revision. Let's begin. Superpowers, emerging powers, and regional powers can be differentiated through a variety of characteristics, which broadly fall into economic, political, military, cultural, demographic, and natural resource categories. Economic characteristics include the size and strength of a country's economy, its industrial and technological base, and its role in global trade and finance. Superpowers typically have large, diverse economies capable of driving innovation and sustaining prolonged international influence. For example, the United States has the largest economy in the world, with technological leadership in sectors such as software, aerospace, and finance. Political characteristics relate to governance structures and diplomatic influence. Superpowers have strong, stable governments able to project influence globally through diplomacy and participation in international organizations like the United Nations or the World Trade Organization. Military power is a critical factor. It includes the size, capability, and global reach of armed forces, along with possession of advanced weaponry such as nuclear arsenals. For instance, Russia and the United States maintain extensive nuclear capabilities and global military bases, reinforcing their superpower status. Cultural influence, sometimes called soft power, involves the global reach of a country's language, media, education, and cultural exports. American culture, including Hollywood movies, music, and fast food, has permeated much of the world, strengthening the US's global position. Demographics also matter. A large and skilled population can drive economic growth and military recruitment. However, demographic challenges like aging populations or uneven population growth can affect future power. China, with its vast population, represents both an advantage and a challenge, given its demographic shifts. Access to natural resources is essential to sustain economies and military power. Countries rich in oil, minerals, and fresh water have a strategic advantage. Russia's vast reserves of oil and natural gas provide significant geopolitical leverage, especially in energy-dependent regions. Emerging powers share many of these characteristics but to a lesser or developing degree. Regional powers tend to exert influence primarily within their geographic region, such as Saudi Arabia or South Africa. Superpowers maintain their influence through a spectrum of power mechanisms, ranging from hard to soft power. Hard power involves coercive measures such as military intervention, economic sanctions, or direct political pressure. These tactics are often immediate and forceful but can provoke resistance and conflict. The U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 exemplifies hard power, attempting to reshape geopolitical realities through military force. Soft power, in contrast, relies on attraction and persuasion rather than coercion. It is exercised through cultural diplomacy, international aid, economic partnerships, and participation in global governance. China's Belt and Road Initiative illustrates soft power in action by investing billions in infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and Europe. China builds political goodwill and deepens economic ties, expanding its influence without military force. The effectiveness of hard and soft power varies by context. Increasingly, superpowers recognize that long-term global leadership requires a balance of both. For instance, the U.S. combines a powerful military with extensive cultural and economic influence, while China is investing heavily in soft power mechanisms to complement its growing military strength. The relative importance of different characteristics and power maintenance mechanisms has shifted historically and continues to evolve today. During the early 20th century, military might and territorial control were primary indicators of power, with European empires relying on naval dominance and colonies for resources and influence. Today, economic strength and soft power mechanisms have gained increasing importance. China's Belt and Road policy is a key example. This strategy leveraged economic investment and diplomatic ties rather than military conquest to expand influence. Such changes reflect the complexity of modern global relationships, where military intervention is often costly and diplomatically risky. Demographic trends are also reshaping power dynamics. Aging populations in Western countries contrast with younger demographics in emerging powers like India and parts of Africa, impacting future economic and military potential. Technological innovation and control over digital infrastructure have become vital in the 21st century. Countries leading in artificial intelligence, cyber capabilities, and information technology gain new forms of power that complement traditional characteristics. During the imperial era, roughly from the late 19th century through the early 20th century, global power was multipolar and maintained largely through direct colonial control supported by militarized dominance. The British Empire was the most extensive colonial empire, controlling territories across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Its global naval supremacy allowed Britain to enforce direct control over its colonies, extract resources, and maintain order through military presence. Other European powers, including France, Germany, and Belgium, also maintained colonial possessions with military force, often suppressing resistance and exploiting local populations. This multipolar system, characterized by competing empires, contributed to global instability, ultimately culminating in World War I. The direct militarized control of colonies ensured superpowers access to raw materials, labor, and strategic locations, reinforcing their status. After World War II, the colonial empires declined, and a new pattern of global power emerged, marked by bipolarity during the Cold War. Power was no longer maintained primarily through direct territorial control but by indirect means involving political, economic, military, and cultural influence. The United States and the Soviet Union became the two dominant superpowers, each leading ideological blocs. Rather than direct colonial rule, they exerted influence via military alliances, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, economic aid programs, Marshall Plan, covert operations, and cultural propaganda. Neocolonialism describes how Western powers and the Soviet bloc continued to exercise control over former colonies through economic dependency, political interference, and cultural dominance, despite formal independence. Since the Cold War's end, power has become more diffuse. The rise of China as an economic and military rival to the USA's global hegemony signals a shift toward multipolarity. China's approach combines elements of soft power, such as infrastructure investment, with military modernization, exemplifying multifaceted indirect control. Different global power structures, unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar, bring varying degrees of geopolitical stability and risk. Unipolarity, where one superpower dominates, can offer relative stability due to clear leadership but risks unilateral actions and resentment from other states. The post-Cold War era saw the United States in this role, sometimes described as hyperpower. Bipolarity, seen during the Cold War, created a tense but stable equilibrium, maintained by nuclear deterrence and mutual suspicion. However, it also risked catastrophic conflict, as seen in proxy wars. Multipolarity can foster greater cooperation but also increases complexity and unpredictability. Rising powers compete across multiple arenas, sometimes leading to conflict as rivalries over trade routes, resources, and alliances intensify. Currently, the international system appears to be moving towards multipolarity with the emergence of China, the EU, India, Russia, and other regional powers. This shift demands nuanced diplomacy and global governance to manage risks and maintain peace. Emerging powers, notably Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the BRIC countries, along with other G20 members, play increasingly significant roles in global economic, political, and environmental systems. These nations have experienced rapid economic growth and expanded influence within international institutions. For example, China is a major player in the World Trade Organization, while Brazil and India are important voices in global development discussions. Emerging powers also influence global environmental governance. They are active participants in international efforts such as the United Nations climate change conferences, shaping negotiations on carbon emissions, sustainable development, and climate finance. Their growing role reflects shifts in global power away from traditional Western dominance toward a more diverse international community. Each emerging power exhibits a unique mix of strengths and weaknesses that will affect their future geopolitical role. China's economic growth is powered by manufacturing and exports, supported by technological advancement and large infrastructure projects. Yet it faces environmental degradation, rising debt, and demographic aging. India benefits from a youthful population and expanding service and technology sectors but struggles with poverty, infrastructure deficits, and political challenges. Brazil's rich natural resources and agricultural capacity are strengths. However, political instability, corruption, and deforestation pose significant problems. Russia's vast energy resources provide leverage, but economic sanctions and population decline limit its influence. These factors create dynamic scenarios where emerging powers may strengthen or falter on the global stage. Understanding the evolving power of emerging countries benefits from contrasting development theories. World systems theory views the global economy as divided into core, semi-periphery, and periphery countries. Emerging powers often occupy the semi-periphery, linking developed and developing regions but remaining influenced by core countries. Dependency theory argues that economic relationships between developed and developing countries create dependent structures, limiting true autonomy and perpetuating inequality. This theory helps explain persistent challenges faced by some emerging powers. Modernization theory suggests that countries progress through linear stages of development by adopting institutions and technologies of developed nations, thereby increasing their global influence. It implies that emerging powers can become superpowers by following a development path similar to established powers. That's all for Inquiry Question 1. Subscribe if this helped, and check out more of my summary videos. Goodbye. Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video we will be looking at the second inquiry question of the superpowers topic. Please like and subscribe if this helps your revision. Let's begin. Superpowers exercise considerable influence over the global economy by shaping rules, standards, and policies through international governmental organizations, (IGOs). These organizations are designed to promote free trade, open markets, and capitalist economic models which tend to benefit dominant economic powers. For example, the World Bank provides financial support and technical expertise to developing countries, often requiring reforms that open these countries' markets to international trade and investment. Similarly, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, offers loans tied to structural adjustment programs that encourage privatization and deregulation. The World Trade Organization, WTO, enforces trade agreements that reduce tariffs and trade barriers, favoring economies that are already powerful exporters and importers. The World Economic Forum, WEF, is a platform where political and business elites meet to discuss economic cooperation and global governance. Through these IGOs, superpowers shape the global economic system in ways that protect and extend their own economic dominance. TNCs, which are often headquartered in superpower countries such as the United States, China, and Germany, have become some of the most influential economic actors worldwide. These corporations operate across multiple countries, managing vast supply chains and controlling key industries such as technology, finance, energy, and consumer goods. Their ownership of patents and proprietary technologies gives them a competitive edge and helps maintain the economic power of their home countries. For example, technology giants like Apple and Microsoft hold thousands of patents that secure their dominance in global markets. TNCs also drive patterns of global trade by determining where goods are produced and sold, often locating manufacturing in developing countries for cheaper labor. Additionally, by promoting consumer products worldwide, they contribute to cultural globalization, spreading lifestyles and values linked to Western consumer culture, reinforcing economic power through cultural influence. Beyond economics, superpowers project their influence culturally through the global reach of their media, arts, food, and entertainment industries. The widespread consumption of Hollywood films, American music, and Western fashion creates a form of soft power that shapes global cultural norms and aspirations. This phenomenon, often described as a westernization, extends economic influence by fostering demand for Western products and lifestyles worldwide. For instance, fast food chains like McDonald's and Starbucks serve not just food but a cultural experience that aligns with Western consumerism. Similarly, major news networks and social media platforms based in superpowers influence global public opinion and political discourse. This cultural dominance complements economic and technological power by creating a shared set of values and expectations that benefit superpower interests. Superpowers and emerging powers act as key actors in global governance, often stepping in as global police during crises. For example, the United States has historically led international military interventions and humanitarian aid efforts during conflicts and natural disasters. Emerging powers like China, India, and Brazil are increasingly contributing troops to United Nations peacekeeping missions and playing vital roles in diplomacy. These countries also participate actively in global climate initiatives, shaping policies and funding projects aimed at reducing carbon emissions and adapting to climate impacts. Their involvement in crisis response and global governance reflects their growing responsibility and influence in maintaining international stability and addressing transnational challenges. Superpowers and emerging nations strengthen their global influence through a network of alliances spanning military, economic, and environmental spheres. Military alliances like NATO provide collective security arrangements that deter threats and enhance strategic reach. Economic agreements such as the European Union, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations facilitate trade, investment, and policy coordination, promoting regional stability and prosperity. Environmental alliances such as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change bring countries together to share scientific knowledge and negotiate responses to climate change. These interconnected alliances foster interdependence, where countries rely on each other for security, economic growth, and environmental protection, thereby reinforcing the power and influence of superpowers within a complex global system. The United Nations is central to global governance and geopolitical stability, providing forums for diplomacy, law, and peacekeeping. The Security Council, where 5 superpowers hold permanent seats with veto power, plays a critical role in authorizing military interventions, sanctions, and peacekeeping operations. This structure reflects both the power and limitations of superpowers, as vetoes can block action but also provide leverage in negotiations. The International Court of Justice adjudicates disputes between states, promoting peaceful resolution under international law. UN peacekeeping missions help manage conflict zones and prevent escalation. Additionally, the UN organizes climate change conferences such as the Conference of the Parties, COP, where superpowers negotiate commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and fund adaptation efforts. Together, these institutions shape the global order, with superpowers often leading or influencing decisions that affect millions worldwide. The resource consumption of superpowers places enormous pressure on the physical environment. Their high demand for fossil fuels leads to extraction activities that degrade ecosystems through deforestation, soil erosion, and water pollution. For instance, oil drilling in sensitive areas like the Arctic or rainforests causes irreversible damage to habitats. Superpowers also consume vast quantities of minerals and food, often sourced from developing countries where environmental regulations are weaker. Moreover, as the largest producers of greenhouse gases, superpowers disproportionately contribute to global warming. Their industrial production, transport networks, and energy consumption release massive carbon emissions that accelerate climate change, affecting global weather patterns, sea levels, and biodiversity. Superpowers vary significantly in their commitment to combating climate change, impacting global environmental governance. The United States has demonstrated inconsistent climate policies, having withdrawn from the Paris Agreement under one administration before rejoining under another. China, while still the world's largest emitter, has invested heavily in renewable energy and electric vehicle industries but continues to rely on coal for much of its energy. These differing approaches create challenges for international negotiations, as progress depends on cooperation among the biggest emitters. The reluctance or willingness of superpowers to reduce emissions influences the success of global agreements and the overall pace of environmental action. Emerging superpowers such as India, Brazil, and Indonesia are experiencing rapid growth in their middle classes, leading to increased demand for a wide range of resources. This growth intensifies competition for critical materials like rare earth elements, essential for modern electronics and renewable technologies. The rising consumption of oil, staple foods such as wheat and rice, and freshwater also puts pressure on global supply chains. This demand can lead to resource scarcity, higher prices, and environmental degradation caused by intensified agriculture, mining, and water extraction. Managing this resource consumption sustainably is essential to avoid exacerbating environmental crises and to ensure that global supply meets growing demand without irreversible harm. That's all for Inquiry Question 2. Subscribe if this helped, and check out more of my summary videos. Goodbye. Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is the third and final summary video for the superpowers topic. If you haven't done already, be sure to check out my other videos on this topic. If this video goes on to help your revision, please subscribe and leave a like. Let's begin our summary. Superpowers often clash over control of physical resources in strategically important and environmentally sensitive areas. One prominent example is the Arctic region, which holds vast untapped reserves of oil and natural gas. As Arctic ice melts due to climate change, new sea routes and opportunities for resource extraction are opening, intensifying competition among countries bordering the Arctic Circle, including the USA, Russia, Canada, Norway, and Denmark. These nations claim overlapping territorial rights and exclusive economic zones, leading to disputes over ownership and rights to exploit these resources. The Arctic is an extreme environment with fragile ecosystems. Extraction activities such as offshore drilling risk irreversible damage to habitats, including breeding grounds for polar bears, seals, and migratory birds. For example, Russia has dramatically increased its military presence and infrastructure to secure Arctic claims, while the USA and Norway have pursued exploration rights. Disagreements over governance and resource access complicate international cooperation and create geopolitical tensions. These tensions reflect wider issues about resource scarcity and the lengths to which superpowers will go to secure critical materials needed for their economies and energy security. The potential environmental degradation also raises questions about the balance between economic interests and protecting vulnerable global ecosystems. Beyond physical resources, superpowers also contest influence in economic spheres involving intellectual property (IP). The system of global IP rights is designed to protect inventions, brands, and creative works, ensuring that companies and innovators benefit financially from their products. This encourages investment and technological development, especially by transnational corporations, TNCs. However, widespread counterfeiting and piracy undermine this system. Countries accused of tolerating or even supporting IP violations, such as China, have faced criticism from the USA and the European Union. Fake goods and stolen technology flood markets, damaging legitimate businesses and reducing incentives for innovation. This leads to strained trade relations, as superpowers impose tariffs or sanctions to protect their economic interests. For instance, the USA has frequently accused China of failing to crack down on counterfeit pharmaceuticals, electronics, and luxury products. This reduces trust between trading partners and complicates international negotiations. TNCs may hesitate to invest or transfer technology to countries where their intellectual property is not adequately protected, slowing global economic integration. Thus, intellectual property rights disputes represent a modern form of economic rivalry between superpowers, influencing global trade patterns and international relations. Superpowers also contest influence through political and military power, especially in regions with contested territories and vital resources. The South and East China Seas are a major hotspot where China's claims overlap with those of several Southeast Asian nations, including Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. These waters are strategically important, hosting some of the world's busiest shipping routes and rich fishing grounds, as well as potentially large oil and gas reserves. China has built artificial islands and established military bases in disputed areas, asserting control and challenging the influence of the USA, which conducts freedom of navigation patrols to oppose China's territorial claims. This has increased regional tensions and raised fears of potential conflict, with implications for global trade and security. Another example is the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine in Eastern Europe. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its military intervention in eastern Ukraine represent direct challenges to international borders and European security. These actions have caused thousands of deaths, displaced people, and damaged infrastructure and environments in conflict zones. Such conflicts demonstrate how superpower rivalries over political influence and resources can escalate from diplomatic disputes to military confrontations. The consequences for human populations include loss of life, refugee crises, and economic hardship. The physical environment suffers from damage to land, water quality, and ecosystems, especially where fighting disrupts agricultural activities or causes pollution. Emerging superpowers, notably China, have rapidly expanded economic relationships with developing countries, particularly across Africa. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRIA, exemplifies this strategy, investing billions in infrastructure projects including railways, ports, and energy facilities. These investments increase economic interdependence, providing developing nations with improved access to global markets, jobs, and technology. However, these ties also bring environmental challenges. Many projects involve large-scale resource extraction, such as mining for minerals and fossil fuels needed for industrial growth. This intensifies environmental degradation through deforestation, soil erosion, and pollution. For example, in the Congo Basin, mining activities funded or operated by foreign companies have led to habitat loss and water contamination, threatening biodiversity and local communities' health. Furthermore, infrastructure projects can disrupt ecosystems and increase carbon emissions if they depend on fossil fuels. At the same time, improved transport links facilitate trade and development, highlighting a complex balance of benefits and costs. Opportunities arise in the form of economic growth, technology transfer, and improved infrastructure, but these must be carefully managed to avoid long-term damage to people's livelihoods and the environment. Countries such as China and India have seen rapid economic growth, elevating their geopolitical status and shifting the global balance of power toward Asia. China's vast manufacturing base and India's growing service sector contribute significantly to the global economy, increasing their influence in international organizations like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. However, this rise also leads to internal and regional tensions. For example, border disputes between China and India have resulted in military standoffs in the Himalayas. Economic competition manifests in trade disputes and rival infrastructure projects across Asia. Additionally, the differing political systems and alliances among regional countries can complicate cooperation. This shifting power dynamic creates uncertainty in the region, with implications for global politics and trade. It challenges existing alliances and requires superpowers and emerging powers to negotiate new balances of influence. The Middle East remains a focal point of global power struggles, combining rich energy resources with deep-rooted cultural, political, and economic complexities. Control over oil and gas reserves continues to attract interest from superpowers like the USA and emerging powers such as China and Russia. Conflicts such as the Syrian civil war, tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the Israeli-Palestinian dispute illustrate how ideological, religious, and national differences drive instability. Superpowers often become involved through military presence, arms sales, or diplomatic interventions, aiming to secure energy supplies and maintain regional influence. Environmental issues, including water scarcity and land degradation, exacerbate social tensions. Overuse of water resources and desertification threaten agriculture and livelihoods, increasing the risk of conflict. The combination of geopolitical rivalry and environmental stress presents an ongoing challenge for regional stability and international relations. Traditional superpowers like the United States and the European Union face significant internal economic challenges that undermine their global influence. High national debts restrict government spending options, while unemployment and social inequality fuel domestic unrest. Economic restructuring is required as manufacturing jobs decline and new sectors emerge. This transition causes social costs, including job losses and regional economic decline, particularly in areas previously reliant on heavy industry. For example, parts of the U.S. Rust Belt and some southern European regions have struggled with deindustrialization, creating political and social instability. These domestic challenges reduce the resources available for international engagement, such as foreign aid, diplomacy, and military spending. They also affect the ability of these superpowers to project soft power through culture and development. Maintaining global military dominance is enormously expensive. Superpowers invest heavily in advanced naval fleets, nuclear arsenals, air forces, intelligence services, and increasingly, space capabilities. These expenditures account for a large proportion of government budgets. However, public and political debate questions whether such spending remains sustainable or desirable, especially in light of domestic economic problems. The opportunity cost includes underfunding of social services, infrastructure, and climate action. For example, the USA's annual defense budget exceeds the combined defense spending of several other countries, yet calls for reducing military expenditure grow. The EU debates collective security arrangements and the cost-effectiveness of individual member states' military spending. These debates signal a possible shift in how superpowers manage their global influence in the future. Looking ahead, the global power structure is unpredictable. Several scenarios exist. Continued USA dominance might occur if the country successfully addresses internal challenges and maintains technological and military advantages. A bipolar world could emerge, dominated by the USA and China, as these two superpowers compete for influence across economic, political, and military domains. A multipolar system could develop, where several countries such as the USA, China, India, the EU, and Russia share power in different regions and spheres. This uncertainty reflects the dynamic nature of global geopolitics, technological innovation, and economic change. Please subscribe if this video helped your revision and check out more videos on screen now. Goodbye.